Welcome to my talk with a friend and player of auxiliary instruments. I am Maggie Smith. I am a clarinetist and I teach at Eastern Illinois University, where I've been for 16 years. This guy that I'm about to interview is someone that I've known since he was a teenager, and I was basically a teenager. So we met at the Ohio State University when we were young back in 2001. And I'm so glad to welcome him here today because he is someone that when I met him was a soprano clarinetist. As I watched and sort of lived through our degrees together at Ohio State, became sort of an amazing E-flat clarinetist. He probably wouldn't admit that to you, but his intonation is ridiculously good. Don't. But so Andrew Brown, he teaches now at SUNY Geneseo, and he also teaches at the Eastman Community Music School, and he plays third and bass in the Rochester Philharmonic. And I think he's going to give some great information about auxiliary clarinets.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking me to do this, Maggie.
It's so fun. It's really been fun to talk to you.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add to the bio that I gave of you?
No, I think that about sums it up.
Okay, well, then I have a specific question. Could you please speak about your background as a clarinetist?
Sure. Background. Well, I'm from upstate New York, from a suburb of Buffalo. I started playing clarinet when I was, I think, in 9th grade. Before that, I was a percussionist. Don't tell anybody. I don't know how I got started. It was one of those things Actually, I do know how I got started. I went to a Buffalo Philharmonic concert in middle school, and I thought it was a great experience, and that kind of got me interested in the whole thing, and the rest is history from there, so to speak. So, yeah. So I'm from Buffalo originally. I took lessons throughout high school, ended up at Ohio State University, and then I came to Eastman for a master's degree. And then ever since then, I've been teaching and performing and subbing around here and there and playing clarinet. Yeah.
Seems about right. I can attest that those facts are true. But I did want to say that I also was a percussionist. I was the cymbal section leader in my college marching band. It was because I had a knee problem freshman year. So I was in the pit, and then I was like, this is the pits. So I started learning the cymbals, and it's really great exercise.
I played in the pit in marching band as well. It was a great way to not have to
march.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a knee patient, and so even then, like our first march across the field, and cymbal section leader, I have these two guys on each side, and I was always like, you guys are doing it wrong. Our first game, my knee buckled and I fell. And it's on video, just me falling and then getting up. Just something fun for everyone. Anyways, back to auxiliary clarinets. How have you found success with auxiliary clarinets, particularly bass?
You mean how did I get started on them, or? Well, I'll start with that. I got started playing bass. Honestly, there was an opportunity when I was a graduate student in Eastman to play some new music and do some traveling. And so at the time I sort of said, yeah, sure, I play bass, and then quickly scrambled to learn how to play the thing. And it was, I'll say that I think bass is a tougher learning curve than E-flat clarinet, or at least it was for me. I mean, they're both difficulty, but as far as doubles go, or, bass clarinet is like a bigger mouthpiece. You're playing in a different register than, you're playing lower pitches than you would play on the standard issue soprano clarinet. And, all the voicing, everything is a little bit different. So it took some getting used to, but I got it together and played some pretty cool concerts in Italy. And that was a super fun experience. And then I had, once you get over that first performance and realize, okay, I can do this, and I stuck with it, and it was something that kind of suits me well. I'm like a bigger person, and I can like, it just suits me. I like to play the bass, and it's something I identify with. I've always felt like I looked sort of it looked ridiculous for me playing E flat clarinet. I always felt like, I don't know if that's true or not, but
Can I comment?
yeah.
You're a beautiful bass clarinetist. The first time I saw you after school, or after we graduated and left, you came to visit me and you had your bass clarinet and you played. I was like, dang.
Oh, thank you.
You play beautifully. I mean, your bass.
And so do you, Maggie.
Well, I love the bass clarinet and I can sort of sit and make a sound and it's great, but I'm too short to play it. So since my feet don't reach the ground when I try to play it too much, it's not good.
Right.
I mean, I love it though, and I prefer that. I mean, let's be honest, I really shined when I was the principal basset horn player in the Ohio State Clarinet Choir. Do you remember? Anyway, I love the basset horn. But yeah, you were a big guy playing E flat, but the thing that you did really well was you worked so hard for good intonation. You had all the fingerings, you knew all the things. I mean, I know that's in your past and your bass now, and sort of E flat is something you don't want to think about, but I have to say you were really good at E flat.
Thank you.
So
I had a good teacher. I studied most of my E flat stuff. I learned from another, I don't think he would mind me saying this, another larger guy that played E flat and probably felt a little like a goon, as I do when I play it. Ted Oyen, whom I studied with a summer at Aspen, was a fine E flat player, and he gave me all the ins and outs and fingerings, and that kind of got me started with all that. Yeah, when you're playing that thing, intonation is like, you could peel paint off the wall with that, so you have to wield it carefully. Yeah.
And be willing, like as I remember, as you were always to say, hey, piccolo player, let's get together. We have something to do.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, you were always, I think to be a good E flat player, having a good ear, knowing the fingerings, and also understanding voicing and how you can kind of change things. What do you say
I think that's huge. Yeah, that's arguably the bread and butter of it, and certainly for playing in an ensemble and having a shot at something good coming out. Like, number one, being willing to be collaborative and talk to your colleagues and work it out and not assume that you're correct. But then also, yeah, having a bank of stuff, of fingerings you can draw upon, and as you said, like voicing and the way you shape your air in your oral cavity, so you can, get a blend in a pitch center that like will work with what's going on around you. I think that is the challenge for playing E flat clarinet, period.
Yeah. You probably don't know this, but back in 2006 or 7, when I first started working here, I called you and I said, Andy, I need all your E flat clarinet secrets. So I still have the page. I wrote it all down. Secrets.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, yes, of the fingerings. And I have to say that they have helped me, because I will just announce this about myself. I do play E flat now and I do enjoy it. I worked on it actually during the pandemic because I just happened to have it. I was supposed to have this gig where I was doing E flat, bass, B flat, and A, like all of the things. And so I was like, I'm going to get good at E flat. And I do love playing it. And I'm not well, I wouldn't say I'm a small person, but I am a short person.
Right on.
But yeah, I get it. But you did E flat very well for a tall guy
for being a goon.
Yeah. I would never call you a goon, but anyway, I used that sheet. I used it for myself to get ready for
probably most of those fingerings, I shouldn't take credit for them. Probably most of those came from the Peter Hadcock E flat clarinet book, which everybody that watches this video is a fantastic resource. He's got a lot of wonderful fingerings in the back of that book and gives you some contextual places to use them. But yeah, I think that's probably where many of those fingerings came from. Yeah.
The working clarinetist for the B flat is also, it's a great place to read about.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually send that article to my students every semester. Read this. Anyway, I digress. Do you have any advice that you would like to give young clarinetists in regard to learning an auxiliary instrument? And I will say, as a teacher, and I get some high school students, so many are like, I play bass clarinet. That's what I do. Like they never played soprano or.
Yeah, that's a big question. Um, I feel like I should start by saying, well, in the case of the bass clarinet, I sort of see that in my thinking, the bass clarinet has like two different personalities, or not personalities, but there are folks that play the instrument as like its own unique solo voice, with so new repertoire pushing the boundaries of the instrument, and I really respect and love that stuff. And then there's what I do, which is something different, I guess. I play ensemble auxiliary instruments primarily, in the orchestra and chamber music and so forth. During the pandemic, I also have tried to expand my boundaries a little bit and get into some of that newer music stuff. But like, I just feel like I should preface it by saying some of my viewpoints on how to play bass clarinet are aimed specifically towards sitting in an ensemble and playing bass clarinet. And I don't know that some of the things that I will say will apply to if you want to play awesome, like screaming bass clarinet, new music stuff with pushing the boundaries and multiphonics and extreme ranges, which is also super cool to do, but that's just not in my wheelhouse. So anyway, if you're going to play the bass, I think, or bass or E flat, and you're planning to do them in an ensemble, I think the first thing you have to do is sort of like take a minute and pay attention to what the role of those instruments is in an ensemble. With soprano clarinet, if you're no need to in the bass clarinet, like in the orchestra, for instance, the bass clarinet is oftentimes more of a cello or a member of the bassoon section than it is a member of the clarinet section. It kind of goes back and forth between those three, I would say, most frequently. That's one of my favorite things about it. But I think it's important to know that because it informs a lot of the decisions that you have to make about how to articulate, tune, make a sound, project, all those kind of important things to get the job done. When you play in an ensemble, you have a role to play, and that's the role for the bass clarinet. So I think that's like a pretty good starting place for the E flat clarinet. Is on the other side of things. The E flat clarinet, in my opinion, is a color instrument and a personality instrument. And if you're going to fulfill that role playing in an ensemble, you have to be willing to make a lot of different characters and colors. That also applies for the bass clarinet, but I think definitely for the E flat clarinet. Some composers wrote for that thing in such a way that you're sort of like a legit high clarinet, like a piccolo or something. That's, in my opinion, much harder to pull off. Mahler symphonies oftentimes have a lot of that stuff, and it's like, oof, yeah. Every time I'm often finding myself saying like, boy, I'm glad I'm not playing that part when there's a Mahler symphony going on. And then, some of the Strauss and other people write for the E flat clarinet in a way that's just sort of like beautifully ugly. And I think if you're to play the auxiliaries, you have to be open-minded and not come in with too many preconceived notions about how things should go or how things should sound. You have to sort of like let the function dictate form. So that's one kind of important starting place, I would say. Yeah.
Love everything you said. And I just had something to sort of piggyback on that just as a teacher. First of all, both of the instruments are often solo instruments, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Especially in modern music, when you hear the bass clarinet or the E flat clarinet, it's like, and as you said, the E flat clarinet, you can't be afraid.
Yeah, that's what you bring up a good point there. Like you have to play the auxiliaries with commitment and intention.
Yeah, they're solo instruments because, if you're playing something that has two E flat clarinets, which I've actually played a couple pieces, it's just like, oh, good luck anyway. But in general, there's just one E flat clarinet solo or one bass clarinet solo, right? So I always say, well, what I teach my undergrads, and I mostly teach undergrads here, I have some master students, and even students that are working on bass or E flat, just always on the soprano B flat clarinet, use a lot of air. Like, let's get that there. And I love having a student working on bass clarinet where they use more air when they come back to the soprano B flat clarinet versus
Translates. Yeah,
right?
I can see that. Sure. Yeah.
I don't know how much that really applies to E flat, but of course you have to use a lot of air. That's the
Well,
main.
honestly, I think I ended up playing E flat at Ohio State because Mr. Pine was like, "Ugh, this guy sounds, we got to get him on something." And he handed me E flat and he was like, "Oh, you sound pretty good on that. Why don't you stick with that?" And I did. I
Do you
just,
know?
I mean, to be to be honest, I think it was a good way. Playing E flat clarinet forces you to get your voicing and your airspeed working correctly. I mean, the thing just doesn't work if you don't do that. And so I think there's some benefits to be gained from that as well.
Which kind of speaks to being a teacher and sort of, hey, you don't use enough air. Well, Mr. Pine would always say, use a harder reed or play bass clarinet or play E flat clarinet. So those are good things that kind of help, I think, people understand airspeed.
Yeah.
You have to, right? I have a student that I've been working on airspeed with, and he'll probably watch this video, which is fine. I don't care. He'll be fine with it. But I said I think it would be great for him to play bass clarinet. And recently, our ensemble was able to work over Zoom with the composer of a piece they played. And I am sorry, I'm not prepared with the name of the piece or the composer, but I saw it. She's a female composer, and it's a piece about meteor showers. Anyway, this student came into me and was just sort of like, I've got to play this bass clarinet solo. And he plays it for me. It's like little. I said, dude, you have to use so much more air. And we would play it together. And I guess he got a compliment because he actually, played with enough air. And I will say it has definitely transferred to his soprano clarinet playing. So
That's good. I believe it. Yeah.
Anyways, let's not get too windbaggy. All right. So my next question is, without getting specific about brands, could you speak just a little bit about an ideal bass clarinet setup and equipment? And, it's okay if you say what you plan. We're just not promoting any particular thing.
Yeah, sure. I basically keep kind of two mouthpieces in my bass clarinet case all the time. Going back to the idea of sort of like roles, I find that in the orchestra, the bass has like two sort of like, there's a lot of things where the bass is this sort of like murky, deep voice, sort of a deep and rich baritone sort of voice. And for that, I have a mouthpiece that was made by Mr. Pine that I like to use for a lot of that stuff. And then I also always have in my case a Selmer C-Star, which is a little bit like perkier and punchier. And I use that for, like other stuff that comes up that's sort of like, okay, for instance, I always think this is funny. There's a lot of orchestra music where the bass clarinet is playing the role of a donkey. And Don Quixote, the donkey, the famous On the Trail solo that everybody has to learn how to practice. You're the donkey. So for that stuff, I like to have a little more, I always call it bassoon in the sound, that sort of reedy kind of resonant, the warm resonant sound that the bassoon gets. I think that's an important sound to be able to make for sitting in an ensemble, or certainly the orchestra, or at least our orchestra. And so I always have stuff that can do that at any given time too. Sometimes it's reeds, sometimes it's a change of mouthpiece. But so yeah, I use two different mouthpieces. I use a lot lighter reed on bass than I do on clarinet, but the sort of net resistance of the whole thing is pretty similar. So it's not accomplished. I frequently play honestly 2.5s and 3s on bass clarinet, which is sometimes funny to think about. I play them and I play them my mouthpieces aren't like super open. I don't know. It's just a bigger air column to get vibrating. And like, I think it's really crucial when you're playing in ensembles for the bass, especially, you gotta be able to start a note exactly like that and not too fwa. And I can't do that on reeds that are too hefty and don't respond really quickly. So that motivates a lot of that. On clarinet, I play a much opener setup, generally speaking. Not much opener, but on the opener side of things, I know. So basically, I don't logic might tell you, oh, this is what I use on clarinet, I should try that on bass, but that has not been the experience for me, at least. I play a different setup on bass than I do on clarinet. So that's pretty much that. On E flat, I use a mouthpiece that Jim Pine made for me as well. And then I also use a lot longer barrel than what comes with most professional instruments. And having talked to some like colleagues and friends over the years, that seems to be pretty common. I'm not sure why that's not an option that's more readily available with professional instruments, but yeah,
What
I
length
using
on
a
the
lot
barrel?
longer barrel.
What
What's
length?
that?
What length on the E flat?
I end up using something that's about 2 millimeters longer than what comes with the instrument.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then sometimes pulling out on top of that, actually.
Right, because especially the upper register.
Yeah, I don't know. It's on that thing. I don't like. I just prefer to not be. I prefer to be battling a little bit of sharpness, I guess. I don't know. Wouldn't want to say, but it's just how it's turned out to be for me. I'm always on the. I haven't tried a ton of E flat clarinets, and I can't speak to everything that's out there. But at least most of the the major brand buffet bass or E flat clarinets I've tried, I've always needed a much longer barrel. So that's just my experience.
I've generally needed a longer barrel in my life until I can't mention brand, but there is a certain clarinet now that's just like plays in tune. I can't say what it is. It's crazy. I
Yeah.
would say it does start a shy bit on the low side, and these are just my B flat and A, but they start a little low, but it's fine. It's gonna get right to pitch, and it'll probably stay there in it unless it gets like 90 degrees.
Yeah. I
Hey,
would.
I had a follow-up question.
Yeah,
So you have a C star?
I do. I have a couple. I have several of
They
them.
don't make those anymore, right?
I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's like we have one, and I sort of want to say, hey, let's put that in a museum. Let's quit letting people use it. I don't understand why they stopped making those.
I don't know. There's something about those summer mouthpieces for me that, like, when I sit in it, like on our stage in Eastman Theater, they make a big resonant sound that's not forcey. It's just like a nice expensive string instrument. There's a lot of something there that really works, and so I always have one of those in my case.
And as a teacher, I mean, I've always recommended that. But anyways, I know we need to wrap things up and not, keep blabbing. But I think this has been great. It's like a podcast. We could maybe do it. Anyway, I just anything you might add. What advice would you give to someone that's thinking about playing the auxiliary clarinet, say you're a high school student for all state, or any sort of ranking critique or feedback, auditioning for college, auditioning for a job, just generally speaking? Advice.
Well, yeah, I would say for starters, like if you're gonna get serious about playing the auxiliary instruments, you have to treat them as their own thing to a certain degree. So that means doing, all the exercises you do on soprano clarinet, long tones with a drone, all that stuff, scales, etudes. Like I think it's important to do all those things on the auxiliaries as well. If you're going to play bass clarinet in an ensemble, you have to be able to read bass clef. So I would say start working on your bass clef reading. Anything that a cello can play, we can play, minus double stops, of course. So they have the same. If you have a low C bass clarinet, it's the same range. It's a good starting place. Also, transposing to A is really important. So I'd recommend you practice that. But for auditions, like, I don't know, there's a lot to be said about that. I don't have much to add to it. Have good rhythm, but also, I guess here's something that when I hear people in the situation you just described, I find myself also frequently picking on them for the way they get started with like an excerpt or something they plan to play. I think it's important that number one, you start from like practice, do a lot of repetitions of starting from like a place of repose, breathe in time, and then play. And then make sure that the first note that you play you can always start with a clear front on the note, especially on the bass clarinet. That's surprisingly difficult to do at times, but very crucial for ensemble playing and for auditioning too. So that's probably my biggest. Also, record yourself a lot. That's like the answer. I always find that's the answers to the test. Oftentimes the things that like aren't working well are things you didn't even realize you were doing. And as soon as you hear yourself on your recording, it's like, oh, I can fix that. So
That is, I think that's good for all musicians.
Yeah. Yes.
Good
It's
answer.
painful, but it's effective and necessary to record
Andrew
yourself.
Brown.
Yeah.
My last question, and I'm asking this as someone who, like I said, I can't play bass clarinet very much. I love playing it. I actually make a nice sound. I'll just say
I
that.
believe it.
I
Yeah.
do.
I'm not surprised to hear that at all.
But I can't really do it because I have some issues with carpal tunnel tendonitis. I'm too short. I think it's mostly because my feet don't reach the ground in a standard orchestra chair. Um,
Mm.
and so as a clarinet teacher, and I always have people that want to major in bass clarinet. I'm sort of like, well, at a school like where we are, where most students are music ed, I sort of think you've got to just learn how to play soprano clarinet. If you can't play soprano, you know what I mean?
Can
Do
I say, yeah, I'll,
you think it's fair to say you can play bass clarinet if you cannot play soprano? What do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, there was a time in the not too distant past when there were folks that were like, orchestral bass clarinetists and they only played the bass clarinet. Some of them played saxophone too, but like their job was to play bass clarinet. Those days are effectively over now. Anytime, if you're going to play bass clarinet for money in an ensemble, you're going to have to probably play some clarinet too. And you have to be able to switch back and forth instantly and somewhat comfortably. I mean, auditions ask you to do that. And it's something that needs to be practiced. But yeah, for sure. I'm like, I went on, I think the bass clarinet you have to treat it both as its own unique solo voice and do long tones on it, play your etudes, practice it, develop a sound and a style on it. But you also have to be able to think of it a little bit as a big clarinet and be able to go back and forth and find similarities between soprano clarinet. And I think it's important to practice both ways. And without a doubt, in the age we live in now, you have to be able to, if you're going to be a bass clarinetist, you need to be able to be an effective clarinet player as well. No question about that.
Thank you. I that resonates with me so much because, like I said, I find that getting a student to learn to play bass clarinet tends to make their soprano clarinet playing better and vice versa. But do you have any, excuse me, it's my allergies. Do you have any particular repertoire pieces, okay, let's say for soprano clarinet, that you find work well for bass, or
I do.
any particular also? So just, well, you answer that question, then I have one more, and then I know we have to wrap this up. But
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, if somebody asks on the fly to play something or what, and it's like, can you play something tomorrow night on bass clarinet for whatever X, Y, or Z event? I almost always play the Sutermeister Capriccio. I find that it has like a nice derpy quality to it, that like works with the donkey derpy aspect of yeah, exactly, the bass clarinet. I think it's great for that. So I frequently use that. I have a series of cuts that I can put in there if I need to shorten the length or whatever, but that's my go-to clarinet piece that works on bass. There's probably a bunch of other ones too. I saw a thing recently with, I think it was Michael Lowenstern playing the Rigoletto Fantasy on bass, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah. I mean,
I have to check that out. That piece is
yeah.
Cool. The Wilson Osborne is another one of those.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
I know when we were at Ohio State, a lot of people did that. I have never had a student play the Sutermeister on bass, and it makes total sense. But anyways, I digress. Go ahead.
Probably need there's a couple of fingering adjustments. I use a lot of overblown throat tones, third partials, if you will. And I think that's really important. That's, the only way to get some of the registration in that piece to work, I think. FYI, if you end up having anybody do it. Yeah.
Well, we might have to have another podcast for that. Hey, this has been really fun.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me.
I feel like I've learned something about teaching bass clarinet, and I appreciate that. I'm sure
that's a good. It's been nice to chat with you and go down those are some fun memories. It's been a while since Ohio State.
Yeah, I'm gonna officially end this recording. So thank you everyone for listening. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on the social media committee, and this is Auxiliary Clarinet Month wrapping up. So Peace.